all right, so let's hear from Rick Spielman, because he's obviously heavily influential in George Paton's process to getting to this point where he is the GM of the Broncos, and he, of course, is the GM of the Vikings. I thought this was a great answer today when he met with the media. He was asked about his advice that he would give to George Paton, and he gave us a little bit of insight into what the Minnesota Vikings like to do as far as their organizational structure as it relates to their roster. Give it a listen.
For George, I think, he's seen and he's seen so much that we've been through together. And even, when we started here, when we started in Miami, and when he came in to Chicago, there's no one that's probably seen as much and been exposed to as much as I've exposed George to everything that goes on in this business. I know he has a specific plan on what he needs to get accomplished when he gets there and gets going. I know the, free agency, the draft, understanding the roster. I don't want to speak for him, but he'll have a plan in place on what needs to be done and what needs to come to the forefront. And the number one thing is always the personnel. That's the lifeline of our organization, especially in the draft. And we've been always big believers in building our rosters through the draft. Hopefully you're doing a good enough job where you're hitting on your draft picks, and then those draft picks are the ones that you end up keeping and extending and not letting get into free agency and build your roster that way. And we've had some success doing that here. And I think George will carry a lot of those philosophies, but I also think George will have some things that he wants to do differently. And I'm excited for him because now, although, when we talked and put our plan together, he always had a big influence and a big input on what we've done and how we did things. And now he's get a chance, like I said, to run the show there. And I'm anxious to see what he puts in place and some of the ideas that he may have on how to move forward.
So Rick Spielman talking there about the advice he would give to him in that first month, and he didn't get into too many specifics, but when he started talking about the philosophy of the Minnesota Vikings and it's draft and develop, and they build from there, they try to keep their own guys, something that is a little bit foreign to this team in recent years. And I mean, certainly they've been players in free agency. I mean, I think a lot of people can point to Kirk Cousins. A lot of people have been pointing to Kirk Cousins as a glaring example. But I love, we talked to Brandon Cristal a little earlier, and he brought up a point that, hey, if Teddy Bridgewater wouldn't have had that horrific leg injury, they wouldn't have made a trade to go get Sam Bradford, who eventually got hurt, and then eventually they decided to go Kirk Cousins. They drafted a quarterback in the first round that actually is still playing in the league. They just couldn't, in that window, hold on to him and hold on to hope that he'd get better. So I think people are projecting on this team, from the Vikings to the Broncos, on what they think they're going to be. I think more than anything, I'm looking forward to a front office that is focused on retaining their own players, drafting and develop and building from that, because it seems like in the last several years, we get to free agency, Ben, and we're like, man, this UFA, who knows? I don't even know if they're going to offer him a contract.
Yeah, let me go back a little bit here first, because what people are doing here are focusing, we talk about the process and the result. People are focusing on the result, not the process. The process was Teddy Bridgewater had a horrific injury. They had to make some kind of move, so they went and got Sam Bradford, who also got hurt, and then Case Keenum became the starter, which, he got them competitive, but he wasn't quite good enough to take them to the next step, which meant that they were out there searching for a quarterback in free agency the next go-round. As you pointed out, instead of Teddy Bridgewater just being the guy all the way through, right? So the process there was a spate of injuries led them to keep trying to go buy a quarterback because they knew they were in a window. But the process says they drafted a guy to be that guy, and they were going to roll with that. And so you can go and you can find examples of this all over the place. If the Dallas Cowboys and Jerry Jones had gotten their way, they would have jumped and gotten Paxton Lynch. The Broncos would have wound up with Dak Prescott in the second round. And we're talking. This whole conversation is different. The process and the result. You can't judge the result solely and then go back and try to reverse engineer things to figure somebody out. Situations change. The way that people have things laid out at the time, it all changes. And so the idea that you're going to peg what George Paton's going to do based on what the Vikings did, well, the Vikings were reactive to a situation. So this idea that you've suddenly got the magic formula or the bead or the fix on George Paton is laughably silly, first of all. And then second of all, George Paton is a notoriously tight-lipped guy. So I'm going to tell you, it's going to be real interesting to see who is able to come up with quality information, once he gets in here, because he is a notoriously tight-lipped guy.
But certainly if he's a guy that likes to draft and develop, which at least philosophically, that's what it sounds like.
Right. And he is. He's draft and developed.
Then isn't that good news for some of these UFAs that we're getting ready to see? Justin Simmons is one of the first ones that comes to mind.
I think so.
It's not one of his guys, but organizationally, it's one of their guys.
Right. I don't think it's good or bad news as far as that kind of stuff goes. I think all the guys that want to come back to Denver are probably going to be coming back to Denver. I'll put it to you that way. Some of them may have more obstacles than others in terms of finances, specifically with restructures with some people. But I think for guys like Shelby or Justin, if they want to be here, the opportunity is going to present itself. So I think if you want to keep this team mostly intact and you like those guys, you're going to be very happy with that. I think if you're somebody who is looking for somebody who's going to win free agency, probably not going to be happy with this general manager hire, because he's not that guy. And he understands that winning free agency usually means mediocrity midseason.
But that's actually where they're sitting right now. That's probably a good thing. They don't necessarily need to be major players in free agency.
You never want to be a major player for because you have to overspend. In free agency, you spend A+ dollars for B+ talent. That's how that works. You're buying a guy who's coming off a performance that his team didn't want to pay. Meaning that in order to keep their guy, they were going to have to overpay. They knew they were going to have to overpay to keep their guy. They didn't want to do it. So they're going to let somebody else overpay for him. You spend A+ money on B+ talent. You want to draft and develop. You want to bring your own guys up. You want to have plenty of guys on rookie windows to keep things cost controlled, and then juggle the money around to your guys that are in their prime. And you let guys that get past the prime, you kind of let them go a little bit, unless they're a legacy guy like Vaughn or something like that. And then you want to keep them Bronco for life. But smart general managers, that's how it operates. There's a patience component to it, and fans don't want to hear that because they've been told to be patient, be patient, be patient. This is a new regime. Give it time. Be patient. You don't have to have everything solved on day two. If it were possible to have it solved on day two, guys like John Elway and Matt Russell, who aren't idiots, would have figured it out.
100%. Well said.